All right, so welcome everyone to the 7th week of our class. And this week we are going to begin looking at the end of World War I, going into World War II, and the rise of Nazism, the rise of Adolf Hitler, and the Holocaust, and talk about those kind of the crescendo, if you will, of a lot of what we've been talking about. Next week will be our final class, and then next week we'll look at anti-Semitism really in the latter 20th century and in our own time. So before we begin, though, I was talking with Meg at ONEG, and she did something that's rarely ever been done. She followed the rabbi's advice. So I'm just kidding. But I want just for her to share the experience that her and Heather and Derek had. Y'all were all together, right? Or just you and Heather? Okay. But I'm going to let her tell the story, and then I think it's relevant to our topic. It is relevant, and I'm going to explain in case it's not so clear. But go ahead and tell your story, kind of what you were telling me today. Neither am I. I'm not a good speaker either, so just go for it, Meg.
Well, we went to a shul because our prayers were for this shul to be enlightened with the truth. And we heard that they got a rabbi from Israel coming through and teaching them. So we decided to go and listen and hear. And he had all this wonderful stuff to say about the Old Testament and tying it to Messiah. And the thing that kept popping in my head was, I need to ask him how observant he is. That's what Rabbi said to do.
Right.
So after class, I asked him, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, what is your observance level? And he just looked at me. He said, where is this coming from? And I told him, well, I'm in the process of converting. And he said, converting to what? I was like, Judaism? What else do you convert to?
Right.
And he's like, but you believe in Messiah? I said, yeah. He said, that doesn't make any sense at all. And he says, once you have Messiah, you have faith and have no need of the Jewish way of life, pretty much. I'm like, what? I was like, no. Mm-hmm. And he's saying it doesn't mesh, it doesn't mix. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, right.
But he just claimed to be Orthodox, and my question was to Rabbi, how does someone who says they're very knowledgeable in the Old Testament and even tying stuff from the Tanakh to Messiah can believe this way? And it just really kind of shocked me, really. I was like, no, we need our Jewish way of life.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem.
So
did he actually use the term Old Testament in his
yes.
lecture?
Yes.
Okay.
He used
That's
Old
good.
Testament, and
right.
I mean, it was just kind of odd.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And the reason I wanted her to bring that out is because there's a theory that I have that has, I guess maybe it's more than a theory, but we'll use theory for lack of a better word. And it's a reason why this class is so important. And that theory happens to be that type of attitude that comes from a alleged born Jewish person, and an alleged born Jewish person who comes from an Orthodox background, to now be able to say, now you don't need any of that, all you need is faith in Messiah. One of the primary roots of that is an anti-Semitic spirit, which most people, if they haven't ever taken this class, would say, how is that possible? This guy is a Jewish person. He's an Israeli. He comes from an Orthodox background, et cetera, et cetera. How could he be an anti-Semite? And yet we've seen over and over again that it's normally that type of person who is the worst anti-Semite. And we're going to be talking about one of them today who happens to be named Adolf Hitler. So, yes, ma'am. So the question for those who are watching was, did he ever answer the question about his observance level? And the answer was no. He never would answer the question directly. He simply said to put your beliefs on people and insist they have some type of level of obedience or observance would be considered legalism. So Meg's question to me initially was, where does that come from? How could somebody believe that? And the answer to that really is that that person is a Christian. That is a Christian doctrine. They are nothing. They are a Christian who happens to be Jewish by heritage, but that's it. So all those doctrines are Christian because it is the antithesis of Judaism. Judaism and the Torah teach that when Messiah comes and one accepts Messiah as Messiah, that their observance level does not decrease or fall away. It actually increases, becomes more meaningful, more spiritual, more zealous, becomes more real in their life. And we know this from several different sources, not the least of which is the book of Ezekiel, which specifically says that I will cleanse you, purify you, pour my spirit into you, in order that you will obey my statutes. That's what it says that 3 different times in 3 different verses in the book of Ezekiel. So we know that true belief in Messiah leads to observance, not away. And I think it was Heather was saying, isn't that like an anti-Messiah? And I would suggest, yes, it is, because it's more than a suggestion. Actually, the book of Deuteronomy chapter 13 says as much, because Deuteronomy 13 says that if someone, a prophet who does great miracles, even raises people from the dead, but he leads you away from the path of your God, then you should know that that's a false prophet that I sent to test your heart. So if you're following after a Messiah who is actually leading you away from Torah, you are, God forbid, following a false Messiah. You're following an anti-Messiah. And in terms of don't push your beliefs on people, that's legalism. Well, that's called Torah. I mean, you're just asking what's your observance level. And if you think about her question was just simply, what's your observance level? She wasn't making a judgment. She was just simply saying, I just want to know what your level is. Are you still Orthodox? Are you Reform? Whatever. And for the person to get defensive right away is indicative. Now, I will also submit to you that the very fact that anybody who is a rabbi from Israel or anywhere else and uses the term Old Testament, if you're ever talking to a rabbi, and especially one who's from Israel, and they use Old Testament, then you're talking to a Christian. You're talking to a Christian who's masquerading maybe as something else, but is a Christian. That is an offensive term, extremely offensive. And Old Testament, brings up another good point. The term Old Testament is a very anti-Semitic term. Do y'all know why? I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but the term comes from a man named Marcion, who coined the phrase. Marcion lived in the 2nd century, and he taught that the God of the New Testament is different than the God of the Old Testament, and the God of the New Testament came to undo what the God of the Old Testament had done, and it was Marcion who coined the phrase Old Testament, as in not relevant, from that other deity, New Testament as in this is what we need to be following, not that other old stuff. Well, to the church's credit, they branded him a heretic. However, Marcion had a very popular following. And even though the church denied the idea that the two gods, there's 2 different gods, but in practical theological terms, they adopted that concept. Because if you talk to a Christian today, they will never say, well, there's 2 different gods, but they will say, but God did something different then and he does something new now. But we talked about that in the Drosh today, that's in effect 2 different deities, God forbid. So anyway, that is a very anti-Semitic term. So all of this is relevant for this class because all of that, what she experienced, really comes out of an anti-Semitic spirit. When this guy looks at her and says, he allegedly is from an Orthodox background, and this is something else you can think about if you're ever in this situation. He had said to her, and Heather perhaps, that he attended a yeshiva in Israel or something. kept calling it yeshiva seminary. It was probably a Christian seminary, most likely. But he's making it appear as if it was a yeshiva, right? So the question to ask is very simple. What was the name of the yeshiva you went to? Because what I would do is I would call the yeshiva or contact them and ask them if they ever had that student. Because if it was a yeshiva, yeshivas are very tight-knit. It's not like saying somebody could say they went to seminary at Southwestern or DBU or someplace like that, and that may be a needle in a haystack to figure out if they actually went there. But yeshivas are different. Yeshivas are different because they're close-knit. The rabbis usually know who their students are. And if you call up and say, hey, I heard Rabbi Fred Yokobatis was a member at your yeshiva, and they go, who? Okay, then you know, okay. Look, this is all about getting past all the fluff. But going back to my original point, this person, that's anti-Semitism when they say, convert to what? He knows what you're talking about. That's anti-Semitism. You know, this basically what he's looking at you and saying, another Messianic rabbi looked at me and said one time, why would you want to be a Jew? And this person came from a Jewish background. I mean, that's like, I don't know, is there another, I can't think of an instance whether, maybe there is, and I just can't think of it, of another culture or race that's so self-hating like that. I mean, I don't know, normally you're kind of, you're kind of proud of your heritage, whatever that happens to be. I'm Cherokee Indian. I'm Irish. I'm Scottish. You've never been to Scotland, but I'm proud to be Scottish. I don't know. I'm French. I've never been to France. Don't really care to go now with all the stuff going on there. But I'm French. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But I think it was a good learning experience for both of you. And unfortunately, we can see that is not an uncommon point of view to take. Yes, ma'am. Because his theology, as a Christian theology, doesn't accept a non-Jew to become a Jew, even though Judaism does, as we talked about in the Drosh today. It's just like I've said on other occasions that all of this doctrine that floats around there in the Messianic world of Jews are Jews and Gentiles are Gentiles, that is Christian doctrine. And the way that you know that, the way that you step behind the curtain and see Oz for who he really is you say, what's your foundational scriptures that you're standing on for that? And they will all be from Paul's letters, all of them. Well, there might be a few from the book of Acts or whatever, but they're all from Paul's letters. And by that you know that they are 100% thoroughly SDA, USDA approved, certified Christian. Okay? Because none of those doctrines are Jewish. In fact, I was talking to somebody last week who is a non-Jewish person working through conversion. But they have a very strong Jewish persona. They dress, live, eat, breathe. It's for real, it's not phony, a Jewish life. And he was telling me that he goes to, and this is a true story, and it's happened many times, but he is just another example of it. He goes to a Messianic environment, and they find out he's not Jewish halakhically yet, and they say, why are you playing dress up? Why are you even doing this? You're not Jewish. You don't have to do this. Why you know? And they give him a hard time to the extent where he just feels unwelcome. He goes to a Chabad center, and he walks into a Chabadnik event. They think he's Jewish. He tells them, well, I'm not really halakhically Jewish yet, but it's my heart's desire. This is what I'm working towards. Their response to him is, well, you ought to just come over here and convert. Their response to him is, you actually kind of look more Jewish than all of us. Their response to him is, wow, this is amazing. Tell us your story. This is great. Then they find out that he believes in Yeshua, and they're like, that doesn't compute because we understand that everybody who follows this messianic guy eats pork chops, and now you don't. So we're having a hard time. And they're like, well, look, just, you know what, just forget, why don't you just come over to just convert through. They're encouraging him to finish the process, albeit in their environment. But thank God this person is 100% secure in his emunah in Yeshua. And he's like, well, I can't do that because Yeshua is the Messiah, and trust me, I know that to be true. And they're like, okay. But see, somebody who has been rejected in the Messianic world and goes in that environment, and they're like, hey, come on in. This is great. Look at you. This is what Hashem wants. They're like, well, okay, awesome. And they go through conversion, they end up denying Messiah, and it's all the Messianic's fault. And the reason is twofold. It's anti-Semitism, number one. And number two, it is because of a thoroughly Christian worldview and theological view. Does this make sense what I'm telling you? This happens all the time. All the time. I went, when I used to go to the Messianic rabbis' luncheons, quote unquote, they asked me, I'm dressed similar to this. They asked me, do you dress like that all the time? And actually, I thought, because I was so this is just normal, I actually thought they meant, do I always wear dress-up slacks and stuff? And my response was, no, sometimes I wear jeans. And they're like, no, like the seat and all that. I don't understand the question. Doesn't compute. Don't Jews dress like this? What do you mean? I don't get it, you know? Like God said, wear these, so we do. Y'all don't, but we do. So I don't know. But this is the problem. And the reason I like to bring out these things like this, I ask people to ask these questions, is because normally non-Jews just take it for granted that this is how Jewish people live. And I think that as a result, they're hoodwinked, as we would say, and so on. All right. Any questions about that? Questions about what I've shared? All right. So, 1918, World War I has come to a close. World War I was doesn't get as much notoriety as World War II, but it was, I don't know statistically, I want to say that World War I was deadlier. Certainly it was more brutal than World War II. World War I was a season in which mankind had discovered things like the machine gun, mustard gas, nerve gas. It was just an atrocious battle. It was pretty much the same characters involved in World War I as there were in World War II. It was the French and British and the United States fighting against Germany. I'm not sure I don't recall who Germany was allied to, but some of the Eastern European nations, the former Prussians and so on. And of course, Germany lost that battle again. The United States didn't get involved until kind of late in the game. That's where, a random historical point is where the Marine Corps got their nickname Devil Dogs. They got it from the Germans in World War I, who referred to us as Teufelhunden because of our ferocity, apparently, on the battlefield. So that's where the term devil dog came from. Marines were also called stormtroopers by the Germans, too, in those days as well. But at the end of World War I, Germany found itself thrust into just economic and social chaos. Here you have this great Germany, and they've been really embarrassed and defeated by the French and by the British, and having to sign a treaty at Versailles that basically subjugated them for the most part, or relegated them to a nothing nation. Henry Bobaum was a member of the German army who fought for Germany in World War I, along with 100,000 other Jews. Again, as we said last week, Jewish people who live in their home, their motherland, whatever that was, generally were very patriotic to their land. And in this case, Jews in Germany in World War I fought for the Reich to the tune of 100,000. But it says here, he returned home to Germany to find that anti-Semitism was sweeping the nation, And he later wrote, "You could taste anti-Semitism everywhere. The air of Germany was permeated by it. All the unavoidable consequences of military defeat, revolution, a ruined economy, the peace treaty from Versailles, the loss of the territories on the east and on the west of Germany, the unsettling social changes following in their wake, each and everything was blamed on, guess who? The Jews. And in this case, and or the communists, who the people thought, to the Jew hater, the communist and the Jew was the same thing. So the Jewish people were getting the brunt of the blame here for Germany being just decimated. It says here, at the end of World War I in 1918, Europe was home to more than 9.5 million Jewish people. At the end of World War II, there would only be 3.5 million left. So that's what happened to the Jews in Europe. So I think one of the most important things to remember about the Holocaust in Germany is that it was not an isolated event. What we've seen here is kind of a stepping stone, a pattern of buildup, that the crescendo of the Holocaust occurred in Europe in the late 1930s and early to mid 1940s, but it's not an isolated event. It is something that has been a part of church culture. It's been a part of the various cultures of the various countries. It's been a part of the Inquisition culture, and to the extent that it finally led to the slaughter of 6 million Jews, with unspeakable, horrid atrocities that affected men and women, children, infants, young and old. You know, there's, it's really, I'm just kind of reluctant to even speak about some of the atrocities, but medical experiments done on people. It's just it's horrific. It's horrific. But it wasn't isolated. And the scary thing about it is that this happened in a time period that developed Albert Einstein, who was German. This happened in a country that was extremely sophisticated, brilliant, okay? These are people who produced the Tiger tank that on the battlefield against the Americans, it would take a squad of Sherman tanks to defeat one Tiger tank. Their equipment, we almost lost World War II. In fact, if Hitler hadn't been crazy, if he'd have been a little bit sane, we would have lost, except for God's help. Hitler, at the point at which Hitler lost the war, this is a historical note, is that I believe it was the 6th Panzer Division, if memory serves me correctly. But when we landed on Omaha and Utah Beach, the concern was that he would move the 6th Panzer Division to the beach and basically crush us on the beach. But America had worked out this ruse, and Hitler was convinced that the landing on Omaha and Utah and Sword and Juneau was a ruse, and he was most fearful about General George Patton. And the Americans, we had, through our secrecy, had made the Germans believe that Patton was going to invade, I think at Calais or some other place, and he was waiting for that to be the real invasion. And because of all of his generals, including, I just went blank on the guy's name all of a sudden, the German fox, Rommel, yes. Including Rommel, they all wanted him to move the Panzer Division to the beach and crush this. But Hitler was so insane, he decided not to. It was because of that one failure that he lost the war, really. But that's how sophisticated and how incredible Germany was. Now, I will say that it is also scary because history does repeat itself. And Britain and the European allies, and America too for that matter, failed to act when Germany started to first raise its head. Y'all remember that it was the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain went over there, signed a peace treaty with Hitler, came back on the tarmac in London, said, "Peace in our time." And no sooner had the ink dried on that document that Hitler was invading the Czech Republic. And then he invaded Poland. And then we got on the doorstep of France. The European allies decided we need to declare war. By that time, they were already geared up. But in any case, nothing happens in a vacuum. So it says here, in a single week in November 1918, Germany experienced earth-shattering changes. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II gave up his throne and fled to the Netherlands. Within hours, the Social Democrats, then the largest political party in Germany's parliament, replaced the monarchy with a republic. The new government faced incredible challenges, including the possibility of revolution. And like it happened in Russia, the communists were trying to start a revolution there. The capital, Berlin, was so unsettled that lawmakers met in Weimar, which is about 180 miles to the southwest, just to have a safe place to meet. It says the newly established government was therefore known as the Weimar Republic. So what's going on here is, in the wake of World War I, you've got Germany that's just in an absolute upheaval. There's just a lot of chaos going on, and it gives Hitler this opportunity to rise to power. Now, Hitler had served in the German army as a corporal, which, if you're not familiar with military ranks, it's just a very low rank. I mean, it's just but this corporal would become the Führer of Germany in a very short period of time. So Hitler believed that world history was ultimately a struggle of death between Germans and other members of the so-called Aryan race and the Jewish race. Hitler, for some reason, I don't know the backstory, but he really, really hated Jews. But he himself was Jewish. Some would say this is the great irony of history. I say it's the great phenomenon of history. So he hated Jews. He considered that Aryans were against the Semites, the Jewish race. So he set about trying to create, obviously, animosity towards the Jews. His views were based, it says here, on the virulent racism of his own time, as well as the romantic nationalism that involved Germany in the early 1800s. It says here that it was a nationalism that idealized the Volk. That is a word that literally means people. So you have the car Volkswagen. It's a people wagon, right? But the word came to mean race. So the Volkswagen could be the race wagon, right? So it was a race of people with a distinct culture and soul. So Jews were seen as the opposite of the Volk. So the Volk was like the primary race, I guess white, blonde hair, blue-eyed, that type of thing. And Jews were seen as the opposite. It wasn't just Jews, although that was the primary target, but they also targeted gypsies, and they targeted black people and homosexuals and some Catholics and others, and communists. But Jews were the primary target for sure. So it says here that even though Jews suffered from inflation along with everyone else, they were increasingly blamed for the crisis. So Hitler tries to create chaos in the country. He tries to have a kind of a misguided rise to power. And he is at one point incarcerated. So while he's in prison, Hitler and an associate, it says, writes Mein Kampf, which was supposed to be an autobiography that included his own beliefs and plans for the German future. So the book romanticizes the Volk by comparing their souls to the evil and soulless Jews. So one thing that Hitler was good at, he and his minions, were making Jews not human, to where they don't even have a soul. So it says, although many Germans shared these views, they were, at the time, unwilling to go as far as Hitler did. So you can see where a radical view just seems so radical, and nobody's going to go with that view until pretty soon, it becomes normal. How many of you would have thought that going back just 20 years ago, that it would have been okay for men to use the ladies' room at a public facility? I saw something that was a mime on Facebook. It was kind of funny, but true. I mean, if you think about it. It said that, talking about another Democrat president, JFK put a man on the moon, and Obama put a man in the women's restroom. I mean, how sad is that? And what culture? I mean, who would have thought that would have even been something we would have had to discuss, to even think about? But we can see where a radical idea becomes the norm. And this happened in Germany. So it says here, nevertheless, soon after he left prison in the summer of 1924, after having served only a year of his sentence, he and other Nazis decided to come to power legally and then turn Germany into a racial state, one that would guard the purity of the Aryan race. Their plan was to act as wolves in sheep's clothing. We can learn a lot from history, can't we? So their plan was to go into Germany, pretend like they're real patriotic and they're for the Weimar Republic, but really what they're trying to do is they're trying to wrest power away from the Weimar Republic and make Germany like an Aryan state, an Aryan nation. Now, what's remarkable about World War II history is I didn't even think about this until I really got to studying into it. It wasn't limited to Germany. We have this idea that Hitler rose to power and Germany was Germany, and then they just started conquering all these nations and everybody was just subjugated. That really wasn't how it was. Certainly there were people in France and Belgium and Holland and Austria and different places that didn't want anything to do with the German. But there was a great number of those citizens who willingly said Heil Hitler and willingly signed up for their allegiance. I mean, they had whole regiments that enlisted into the German army from places like Romania and Greece, and even from the Middle East. People who, this ideology, in other words, was not limited just to that single nation. A lot of people, France, it seems like the French government that was working with the Nazis actually went above and beyond the call of duty to round up Jews and send them to the concentration camps. So it's not limited to just, really, if you think about it, Hitler could not have done what he did without that level of support and zeal for his belief system. Now we're led to believe it was all just one man and one nation. Not to mention the fact that these people in Germany, they were sending their children, they were sending their young boys off to these Hitler camps where they were becoming brown shirts. And it shows at one time there's a famous scene of the stadium, and I'm trying to think, it was in Berlin. There was a stadium, and there's hundreds of thousands of Germans, and they're all swearing allegiance to Hitler. Now listen, can you fathom that? There's hundreds of thousands of people all swearing allegiance to one man, and we wonder how that type of thing can happen. It's already happened. I don't know what the anti-Messiah ultimately will look like. I don't know what I don't even pretend to even guess exactly what it's going to look like. But I do know this, it's already happened before. So when you have people stand up and swear allegiance to one person, if that's the way it plays out, and that leads to a massive crackdown by the brown shirts and the SS and the so on, well, you can say, well, that seems far-fetched. No, it happened in 1930s in Germany. Do you understand that in 38, Germany hosted the Olympics? No, I'm sorry. Nazi Germany. Was it 36? It was some 36, 38, something like that. It might have been, you might be right, it might be 36. But there's footage of the Olympians going into the stadium that Germany is hosting, and there is Nazi banners hanging off the stadium. Few people know that. Few people know that the Olympics were hosted by the Nazi government. And of course, one of the funny things about that is the German teams kept losing to all of these non-Aryan countries, and it was making them mad. They didn't win. I don't know if they won any gold at all. But I want you to think about that for a moment. There was a time in in world history, where the Nazi government hosted the Olympics. There may be a time in the future, I hope not, but there may be a time if we keep this era of appeasement and all this going on, where ISIS hosts the Olympics. What would be the difference? At the time they hosted the Olympics, I don't know if this doesn't give a date in it, or does it? Yeah, it does. At the time they hosted the Olympics, you know that Dachau was already open? Dachau, the first concentration camp. It says here, February 27, 1933, during that year in March, they pass an enactment giving the Nazis basically full control of the government. That same day that the Enabling Act was passed, it says, they opened Dachau, and the first inmates were communists. We went to participate in the Olympics in Nazi Germany when Dachau was open. If that's not sobering, I don't know what is. To think, because I don't know about you, but when I think about the World War II era, I think we had nothing to do with Germany until we went over there and started bombing them. No, that's not true at all. Did y'all know that Ford, remember Henry Ford? Did y'all know that he went over there and got medals from Hitler? Henry Ford was a huge anti-Semite. People say now the Ford company has apologized and all that. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I'm just talking about history. Henry Ford was a huge anti-Semite, published a magazine called The Protocols of the Elders or something like that. But he went over and got awards. Did I tell you this already about the companies? Did I tell you about Hugo Boss? Hugo Boss provided the uniforms for Nazi Germany. Oh, yeah. I told you about Bear, right? You know Bear Aspirin? Bear made the gas for the gas chambers. Yeah. I didn't know that until this year. They made the gas for the gas chambers. Chase Manhattan, in order to appease the German government and in order to win their accounts, they, without orders, voluntarily confiscated all the accounts of the Jews in France. Chase did that. It's amazing. It's phenomenal. So in 1924, more chaos in Germany. Hyperinflation. Germany's no longer, if they were prospering in any way, they weren't anymore. The Nazis did not have a good election. They tried to win in the election that year. They didn't do very well. It says here that year their popularity did not increase until October 1929, when the worldwide depression began. And the people who were most affected by the depression were the Germans. And by December 1929, 1.5 million workers were unemployed. A month later, that number jumped to 2.5 million, and it kept climbing. So what happens? The Nazis take advantage of a bad situation. There's a progressive Democratic book, like Democratic National Party kind of book, that says that you should never let a crisis go to waste. If you have a crisis, something happens. This is why when we see racial strife break out and there's rioting, this is why that party, when they see that, instead of intervening and trying to bring calm, they intervene and try to flame it up a little bit. And the reason is because when they're doing that, then they can get agendas passed. Because everybody feels emotion about it, that type of thing. So the Nazis doing the same thing. So in the September 1930 election, the Nazis were expected to win 50 seats in Germany's parliament. To the surprise of many, they went from 12 seats to 107 seats. Now, you understand that the Nazi government was elected to power? Now, see, most people don't know that. Most people think that Hitler came in and stole the power or something. That's not how it happened. The Nazis were elected to power, and then once they got into power, then they made, the history goes on, it says that in 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Hitler Chancellor of Germany. So you can say, well, we want change. So we want to put these guys in. We elected them. And then the people we elect pulls him into being the chancellor. And then it just so happens that he finagles his way into taking control. They've got enough seats in parliament now. Now they can pass legislation. Now they have judges who are also Nazis. So now they pass legislation making Hitler the Führer. That's how it happens, right? And it's like the old cliche of slowly turning the water up on the boiling frog. You don't throw the frog into boiling water. You just turn the fire on and just keep boiling up a little bit until the frog realizes he's dead. This is how it happened in Germany. And this is why I'm saying we can learn life lessons from it for our own time. So this is interesting. The Nazis, you ever heard the Nazi government was supposed to be the Third Reich, right? The Third Reich. So anybody know what the First and Second Reich was? Anybody? This is interesting. So I didn't know either. It says here that for the Nazis, the First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. And the Second Reich was the empire established as a result of the unification of the German states. So when Prussia became Germany and Austria, everybody got the German Empire. That was the Second Reich. The Third Reich was Hitler's Nazi Reich, and he wanted it to last for 1,000 years. That was his point, right? Any questions thus far? Isn't it did you have a question? Isn't it interesting that the First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire according to the Germans? What does that tell you? I mean, I just want to look at it from a historical point of view. When you have Nazis who consider the Holy Roman Empire their First Reich, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Initially it was the Roman Empire, but after Constantine kind of created the Catholic Church, then it became the Holy Roman Empire. It became church state. Because Constantine was shrewd, and basically he realized that the Roman Empire could only go so far with military might. Because you get your supply lines out far enough, and your armies can't compete. So if you can't control people with military might, you can control them better with religion. So let's create a religion and let that become the conquering power of the empire. So then it became the Holy Roman Empire, and you subjugate people by religion. Look what happened in the New World. This is why you have Catholic churches that go back hundreds of years in places like New Mexico. Like for instance, my wife and I, many years ago, visited this Indian village. I forget the name of the Indians, but it's pretty cool. You see those pictures of the plateaus that just shoot up from the ground. It's just flat on top, like this mountain. It's just totally flat. Well, there's Indians that live up there in like little stucco houses and stuff. They've lived up there for 1,000 years, and they still live up there. They don't have running water. They have to go down to the bottom of this big mountain. And it's like a national park. But you can go tour it, and the Indians are still living up there, and it's really kind of cool, But there's a Catholic church on top of that plateau that's been there for, I don't know, like the 1500s or something. And I'm thinking, golly, look at this. The Holy Roman Empire was controlling these Indians way back when. So that was the point of the Holy Roman Empire. So Hitler wants to, it says here in this section, Hitler, to build the Third Reich, Hitler and his Nazi party had to destroy the Weimar Republic. They had to get rid of democracy. They had to destroy democracy. So the first step took place not long after Hitler became chancellor. A fire broke out in the Reichstag, which is the parliament, in February of 1933. It says here, when the police arrived, they found Marvinus van der Lubbe, who was a Dutch communist, at the scene of the crime, and they immediately blamed the communists. They used a crisis to start this rounding up of communists, which also included rounding up of all of their political enemies. So now they had grounds to go about and arrest all these communists who were suspected of burning the parliament. So they arrested 4,000 people and called for an emergency measure to combat this treason. So one of the, it says here that the most effective tool that they used to bring down the democracy was, starts with a P, propaganda. They started using the news agencies to craft the news and craft the narrative of the news so that people would hear it and listen to it and then beat that mantra in their head all the time. And people would now be willing to go along with what the government was saying because, my goodness, we got to do something about this. Right? Have y'all heard, I mean, it's really scary. How many of you know that that there's something called the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, right? So one of those rights is free speech. People have the right to voice their opinion. And free speech really protects speech that isn't popular. So you can't get up and just say a bunch of profanities, you know, because there's city ordinances against that. But like it or not, the Ku Klux Klan can have their meeting. And the Black Panthers can have their meeting. And on a college campus, or not just on a college campus, anywhere, the socialist, communist activists can have their meeting. And there's free speech. Somebody can stand up and they can preach that God hates homosexuals and da-da-da-da, and that's considered free and protected speech. Somebody could stand up there and say God loves homosexuals, and in fact, you know, they're welcome in our church. That's free speech. Whenever a society fails to have free speech anymore, this becomes a major problem, right? So now in college campuses nowadays, there's this phenomenon going. I don't know if y'all have caught it in any of the news programs or whatever, but there's this phenomenon going on where college students are not allowing people they don't want to hear to come and speak on the college campus. And they're declaring it, what do they say? They're saying that they need safe zones where they're not hearing stuff they don't want to hear. Or something like that, right? There's a couple of characters there, and usually, you know, usually they're conservatives that want to come there and speak, you know, present their point of view, and they're being attacked like they can't physically get into the building because all these college students are like throwing stuff at them and hurling insults, and all they're there to do is to give a lecture presenting their point of view. Now, whatever one's political opinion is, whether they're conservative and they're pro, you know, conservative and they're presenting those values, or they're way off the chart liberal, or they're somewhere in between, you know, whatever, their ability to get up and give a lecture, that's called free speech. So now we're developing a culture amongst our young people where we're limiting speech to only that speech that we agree with. And that is a dangerous speech. And here's what makes it so dangerous. We talk about the media being biased, but see, this the scary thing for me, being somebody who enjoys history and understands the lessons can be learned from it, is that Hitler used propaganda to ultimately become a dictator and take people's freedom and ultimately their lives away. And by the way, yes, if you were Jewish or a gypsy or black-skinned or whatever, you ended up at a concentration camp and probably died. But do you think that the German who wasn't a Jew and wasn't a gypsy, do you think they actually had freedom? No. A German in Nazi Europe, or a Frenchman or whatever who was pro-Nazi, all of a sudden you walk across the street and some Nazi brown shirt wants to see your papers. You see how that works? You can't do anything. It's like somebody told me everybody thinks Cuba is so wonderful, but our Jamaican friends go to Cuba from time to time to do business, and they say that when you get to Cuba, you're not allowed to just walk. You got to tell them every place you're going. You're not allowed just to get off the plane and go across the street and go to the eye doctor. You got to tell them. You got to give them an agenda, and it's very controlled. Think you're just going to go to Cuba and smoke a cigar? No, you're not. You might, but someone's going to watch you smoke it. That's Cuba, because it's communist. But anyway, it says the same day that I said this already. The same day that they took full control, they opened Dachau. So little by little, the Nazis started to separate Jews from all the other Jewish neighbors. They began to legalize discrimination. They made it, for instance, in April of 1933, they made it illegal for someone who was not Aryan to hold a job in the federal and government jobs. So if you wanted to go work for the German government, you had to be white. Okay. Now, keep in mind, I mentioned earlier that this is an industrialized nation, a very smart nation. This is also, this is post-Civil War. Now, I know the Civil War was in America, but the Civil War, one of the things that came out as a result of that affair was that slavery had pretty much ended worldwide for the most part. And that people had recognized that people of all skin tones are people too. So that happened in 1860. So now we're in 1930s, and we're now discriminating against colors of skin. You see how you think that couldn't happen, but this is post all of that. It's really dangerous. So it says here that before the month was over, Jewish doctors who had worked in the national health system lost their jobs. National health system. At about the same time, the government sharply limited the number of Jews who could attend a public school or teach in one. And as a result, these and similar laws, about 20% of all German Jews were soon out of work. So now we've got Jewish people who are unemployed. So the Nazis' beliefs included the notion I'm sorry. Let me back up. It says in April of that year, 1933, Hitler's ideas about race were being applied to the nation's Protestant churches. More than 65% of German people, it says here, considered themselves Protestant, and most of those attended Lutheran churches. Now, what do you think the problem with that is? How many of y'all, by the way, read The Jews and Their Lies by Martin Luther? Did y'all download that and read it? Oh, you've got to do that. Don't make me grade you on it. The first page. It's not that long. You need to download it. You need to read it. Because Martin Luther started the Lutheran Church, basically. Okay? So when you understand that, and you understand that most Protestants in Germany were Lutheran, you can see the connection. Now you can see why Hitler, remember propaganda, what does he do? He knows he's talking to a Lutheran audience for the most part. Who does he quote? Luther, to validate his struggle against the Jews. So what do you have? You have a bunch of Lutherans in the audience who are thinking, yeah, that's right. Martin Luther believed the same thing. This must be from God. Now it's a holy war. You see the connection? So this is why it's important to understand that. So he says here, although Hitler never intervened directly into the operation of these churches, he did appoint a Reich bishop to lead a German Christian movement that tried to link Protestant traditions to Nazi beliefs, including the notion that Jesus was not a Jew but an enemy of the Jews. Now, this is an important point, because the old Christian idea is that Jesus wasn't even a Jew. In fact, he was an enemy of the Jews. I'm going to submit to you an equally dangerous idea, and that is one that exists both in the Messianic world and also in the Hebrew roots world. And that is, well, Jesus is Jewish, but he's still an enemy of the Jews. Meaning that his problem was to come and fight against the Jewish leaders. And he doesn't want you to keep Judaism. He just wants you to believe in him. So his issue really is with Judaism and the Jews, even though he himself is a Jew. So they're now admitting that he's Jewish, but they still have his still great enemy is the Pharisees. You see what I'm saying? It still creates, but it still leaves an anti-Semitic flow to the theology because Jesus is really against the Pharisees. You see? And so the Pharisees, you see. So you really don't want, you don't want to become a Jew because that's who he was against. He came to fight against the Jews. That's the insidious nature of that kind of ideology. By the way, there is I wish I had it with me if I'd have thought about it. Anybody have a copy of the Scriptures version of the Bible? Hopefully not, but you might have one. You ever heard of it? Okay. No. Well, no, yes and no. So I don't have a copy here, but I do have a copy at home, and I keep it for reference for this point. So the Scriptures version of the Bible is not in itself the translation as far as what little I've looked into it. The translation itself is probably fine. What it does is in the Tanakh part of it, whenever the divine name is written, it puts Yod He Vav He in there, which is fine. It doesn't spell it out. It doesn't vocalize it. It just says Yod He Vav He. In the Brit Hadashah part, every time it uses the name of Messiah, it spells out Yehoshua. Or it not spells it out, but in Hebrew it writes Yehoshua in Hebrew, which is fine because, frankly, was his name. However, the publication itself came out as a result of the Sacred Name movement. That's why it's like that. And the Sacred Name movement is kind of comical and sad because everybody claims to know what the sacred name is, but nobody knows what it is. So they leave it with Yod He Vav He, so whatever particular sacred name group you're with can vocalize it however, they could say Chabaka Plaka, whatever it is that they think it is. I've seen weird things like that. And then the same thing with the Messiah's name. Now, on the surface, okay, that's fine. But here's my problem. When I was in the preface of that work, and I was looking at the ideology and the theology of their idea of the divine name and why this publication exists, they were explaining they were basing a lot of what they were saying in the preface on the works, and I apologize, but the man's name escapes me, but on this very prolific and popular German theologian, particularly when it's talking about the Messiah's name and all this kind of stuff. So I don't recall his name. It's like Delich or something like that, but that don't quote me on that because that's probably not right. But when I saw that name, it rang a bell, and so I went to go look up who this person was. And this person is a very prolific writer. He has many of his works in seminaries all over America and all over the world, and he was an official member, an official appointed member of Nazi Germany and Hitler's cabinet. Now, I don't know about you. Maybe I'm just a little too sensitive, but I don't want anything to do with any theological perspective that includes a member of Hitler's cabinet, an official member, Nazi pen-wearing member, and this guy is going to tell me anything about biblical theology. That, to me, in my opinion, invalidates the entire work, especially when you're basing your theology on that. Now, I think the whole thing is misguided anyway because it's a sacred name. The translation itself is probably fine as far as that goes, but I'm talking here about the spirit behind the work, if that makes sense. And that's what I wanted to point out. All right, got a few more minutes here, so let's look at some other Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. That occurred on November the 9th. And let's see, what year was that taking place? Looks like, I believe it was 1938. What was Kristallnacht? This is probably an important thing that you need to know. Kristallnacht, it says here that Police officers watched as Nazi stormtroopers looted thousands of Jewish homes and businesses, set fire to more than 300 synagogues in Greater Germany and Austria, killed about 90 Jews. The government also shipped approximately 30,000 Jewish men to concentration camps. This pogrom was called Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, because of the destruction it brought. So this was one of the first outbreaks of overt anti-Semitism and racism and what have you. The broken glass means they went into these Jewish stores and they took up whatever they could and they threw them through the glass of the store, or they busted it, just decimated Jewish businesses and Jewish homes and so on. This is called Kristallnacht, happened in November the 9th. By the end of 1938, Jews in Germany had been fined 1 billion marks for the damage done to them on the night of the pogrom. So the Jewish store owners and business owners and homeowners, they were fined for causing the violence that was wrought against them. See, this is what happens in a world when right becomes wrong and wrong becomes right. Now the person who is being, the violence against them is now having to pay for the fact that they were assaulted. In addition, they could no longer own or even drive a car. They couldn't attend theaters, movie houses, concert halls, or even be at sporting events. They couldn't use public parks. They couldn't use swimming pools. The Gestapo, which is the German police, confiscated their radios. Jewish children were banned from public schools, and every Jew had to adopt a Jewish middle name, Israel for the men and Sarah for the women, so that they could be mocked, of course. That was the whole point. So, those of you who have the book, I would recommend. Says here the first gas chamber opened in 1941. I would recommend that you read the rest of this history. There's just so much about it to actually understand what was going on. Pope Pius VII, it says here, knew about the mass killings as early as the fall of 1941, but he basically did nothing to stop it. So did the U.S. State Department. That's one of the saddest things about this whole history, is that the U.S. government was well aware of what was going on, but we chose really not to do anything about it. So, as I said in the beginning of the class, talking about these historical points, this is the crescendo of what happened, but of anti-Semitism, you would say, in Europe. But what led up to it is all these other back points. Again, this class is largely about looking inwardly, looking at our own selves. I think that these things, that, like what Meg I had her share in the beginning, are instructive to think about our own lives. As I said, I've had many conversations with people who have asked me, I love the Torah walk, I love this, and this is amazing, but do I have to be a Jew? Which is a completely nonsensical question to ask. But the question to ask is where does that question come from? Maybe there's people that have Jewish fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, not Jewish, German grandfathers and great-grandfathers that need to break this off, need to confess the sins of the forefathers, that maybe some anti-Semitism is in that bloodline and needs to be dealt with that way. My wife does not have anybody in her family who was in Nazi Germany, but on a different level, her family came to Texas in the 1848 time frame, so it's a long time ago, originally from Austria. The Schelfenhausens and the Richards is my wife's heritage. And there were members of her family, the Schelfenhausens and the Richards, and other family names that were involved in the Holocaust. So my wife went to an event with me, and there was a German man speaking, and he was speaking in German, and someone was translating for him. And she just began to exist. She said, I felt like tight-chested. And she realized that the German language offended her, like just hearing German, because of not anything that personally happened to her, but because of family, just stuff like that. So she had to go to Hashem and daven about that and get free of that. Now, it wasn't causing anti-Semitism in her, but the point was that anti-Semitism was affecting her in a negative way, some way that she didn't even know about until she just happened to be at this event hearing this person speak. And she didn't, no animosity towards him, don't even know him. But these are the kind of things I'm talking about. Any questions or any insights or input? It's heavy stuff, I know. This class is probably the most difficult, the most difficult class to endure and what have you. But I think it's important to understand it. Yes, Heather. Hmm.
My family has a lot of Native American heritage, and then Derek is biracial as well. So our kids, anybody on the street would look at them and think they're white, but they're actually triracial.
Oh, really?
And so if they were to do that in a place like this, where we're kind of a melting pot, there's no getting away from that.
Right.
All they have to do is go back 1 or 2 generations, and they could look and find half the country, and profile you under something that would need to be given to gas chambers.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It is. You do have to be careful. It is interesting too. I know that. I think that our society, despite what people hear on the news, because I actually live in society, so I don't have to rely upon the news to tell me what society's like. But I think for the most part, we have, good race relations in the United States. I mean, I think that. I think that's the case. I don't have people as I'm out and about on the street, as I see people of different colors, different backgrounds. I don't see people catcalling to them and calling out negative things to them, and so on. I see them going about their daily business, and maybe that doesn't mean that somebody is not harboring some kind of ill will in their heart against them. But I'm talking about just they're able to go about their business, and I see people interact and they're greet each other, and if I'm in the mall, and we were having to go to the mall yesterday and buy something for Hadassah, and so it's people of color waiting on us, and we're saying yes ma'am to them and yes sir to them and all that kind of stuff. But I do understand what it must have been like in an era in America when that wasn't the case, because Jamaica is a great place, but one of the challenges that they have is that there is racism against white people there. And I have experienced it on a number of occasions. Because you have to understand, when you go to Jamaica, I mean, when I'm there, my wife and I are one of the only white people within maybe the whole block or the whole, I don't know. And certainly not the whole city, but you don't understand. It's not like it is here where there's just a melting pot, like Heather said. So it's interesting to me that I've kind of experienced that on the other side, and so I thought, wow, I kind of know what it must feel like to be in an environment where people, and over there, I'm not saying that if you go to Jamaica, you're going to have this happen, but you understand, when we go to Jamaica, we go to Jamaica. Like, we're in the places where there's no tourists. Yeah, and so we were going through Spanish Town one time, which is, there's certainly no tourists there, and I've got people calling out racial epitaphs to me as I'm walking down the street. And I asked Hadassah, and her older sister was with us. I said, they're not saying good things about me, are they? And they're like, no. One man said, hey, English. And I said, I'm from Texas. Not English. That didn't help. But listen, But it is funny. It is interesting. It's an interesting paradigm shift. And I told Hadassah that night, just so this is kind of, maybe it's interesting to y'all. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But after talking with her, she was under the impression that everybody in Texas was white. Because when I come there, she's seeing that. And she's expecting when she comes here, everybody. She thought everybody's white. And I said, oh no. And I said, and no one's going to be catcalling to you on the streets, And I said, probably if that happened, they're going to get beat up. Even before I get to them, they're going to get beat up, okay? Somebody's going to beat them up before I get there. I guarantee you it's going to happen. Somebody you don't even know will beat them up. And so she laughed at that, and I said, but it's true, though. So we took her to my computer there at the hotel, and I pulled up a Sar Shalom service, and I let her see, all the different mixture and everything. And I said, so it's not like it is there. So it's an interesting paradigm shift, but I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. Clearly it does, but I think that we've come a long way in America. We'll leave you with a funny little thing, because it's been kind of a heavy class talking about all this Nazi Germany stuff. So there's a joke. There's these two Jewish men are on a subway, and it's 1938 in New York. And it's Ari and Jaime. Ari comes on the subway. He sits down next to Jaime. And Ari's got the Jewish newspaper. It's all in Yiddish. And it's, all this stuff. And Ari's got he's got a Nazi rag. He's got a Nazi paper. And whatever. Jaime says to Ari, why are you reading the Nazi paper? What are you doing with that? I mean, you're Jewish. And he's like, what are you reading? He says, I'm reading the Jewish paper. It's all in Yiddish. Look. And he says, listen. He goes, look. In your paper, the war is on. There's a depression. Everything's falling apart. And over here, reading the Nazi paper, we Jews rule the world. We're causing everything. We're in charge of it all. I want to get pepped up. I want to get inspired. So, Baruch Hashem. Well, that's the conclusion of our class. Thank you for joining us. I hope it's been informative and helpful. Next week will be week 8, and that's it. Shabbat Shalom.